Mice fed GM soy also had changes in their testicles, including damage to the young sperm cells. Female rats fed GM soy had changes in the uterus and ovaries. The DNA functioned differently in embryos when the parents were fed GM soy compared to non-GM soy. I was speaking at EU Parliament years ago, and a scientist that I knew was speaking there with me, named Irina Ermakova, a senior researcher at the Russian Academy of Sciences. So she gave me these slides. They're Russian-speaking rats. And they volunteered for a soy experiment where they took GM soy starting 2 weeks before they got pregnant. They're female rats. And more than half of their babies died within 3 weeks, compared to a death rate of 10% among the group that was eating non-GM soy. The babies were also smaller on average, and in a subsequent study were unable to reproduce. What happened to her happens so often to scientists that discover problems. She was vilified, attacked, papers were burned on her desk, samples were stolen from her laboratory. She told me at the EU Parliament that her boss, under pressure from his boss, told her she could do no more GM research. She told me one of her colleagues tried to comfort her by saying, well, maybe the GM soy will solve the overpopulation problem. Now, when she was attacked and vilified, there was one particular criticism which was very true. It was a problem with the study. She never did a biochemical analysis of the feed. Maybe there was some kind of toxin inside the soy flour that she used that might have been responsible for the astounding results and deaths. But after doing the same study 3 times with similar results, spontaneously and coincidentally, the rat chow being fed to all of the rats in the facility switched, so it was based now on GM soy. And within 2 months, the infant mortality rate throughout the facility had jumped to over 55%, suggesting that it was not her particular batch that was contaminated, but that maybe soy is solving the overpopulation problem. Hamsters fed GM soy for 2 years. By the 3rd generation, most lost the ability to have babies. They died at 4 or 5 times the rate, grew slower, and some had hair growing in their mouths. If GM crops are so bad, why don't we see more problems? This brings us to that epidemic in the 1980s by a genetically engineered brand of L-tryptophan, a food supplement. How many people remember that L-tryptophan was taken off the market? Marlene, did you have a store at that time? Yeah, so you had to get rid of all your L-tryptophan. And they didn't tell you it was only the genetically modified brand that was genetically engineered. They just said tryptophan is the enemy. Well, it was only one brand that was genetically engineered that was causing the problem. Contaminants that were almost certainly the result of the genetic engineering process. It took 4 years of people getting sick. I mean, 100 people died, approximately. 5 to 10,000 fell sick, some permanently disabled to this day. The epidemic was discovered because the symptoms were screaming to be discovered. There were 3 simultaneous characteristics that had to be in place, all 3, in order for it to be understood that this was something new. The symptoms had to be new, and they were. They were acute, and they came on quickly. What if the GM crops on the market are producing something that's not new? Autism, food allergies, cancer, obesity. You go to the doctors, you say, have you been eating? What have you been eating? No, they just treat you. They don't ask. What if it's something that's not acute? What if it's frequent colds or memory loss? Or memory loss? What if it doesn't come on quickly? What if it's like the hamsters? It shows up in the 3rd generation. When GMOs were introduced in 1996, 7% of us in America had at least 3 chronic illnesses that jumped to 13% in 9 years. Reproductive problems are up, gastrointestinal problems, immune system problems, inflammation, certain cancers. Autism is incredibly skyrocketing. Is it GMOs? We don't know because there's no post-marketing surveillance, no human clinical trials, no proper evaluation of the changes in the crops. Approvals are based on assumptions and rigged research. I'd like you to rate yourself from 1 to 100, how vigilant you'll be next week in avoiding GMOs. How do we end the genetic engineering of the food supply? That's the question. The answer is a tipping point. Remember what happened to Arpad Pusztai? Yeah. When his gag order was lifted, 10 weeks later, the tipping point was achieved in Europe. Completely unexpectedly. And why? Because consumers are at the top of the food chain. What happened with bovine growth hormone? Monsanto sold it off to Eli Lilly. Why? Walmart kicked it out. Starbucks kicked it out. Yoplait and Dannon kicked it out. Most American dairies kicked it out. Because consumers are at the top of the food chain. Because the health dangers changed people's minds about what they wanted to eat, in both cases. What percentage of Americans do you think? Think to yourself, what percentage of Americans need to avoid eating GMOs in order to cause Kraft food to switch over to non-GM ingredients? Now remember, Kraft has already removed GM ingredients from its European and Japanese brands. They're aware that traction on the non-GMO issue can blow up overnight. They're aware that there's no consumer benefits to GMOs. They're not going to label something as low GMO. Low fat, low GMO. I think if they see even a slight drop in market share of any amount that they can attribute to a growing sentiment against GMOs in the United States, they're going to hedge their bets immediately and eliminate GMOs. Desperate companies will announce that they're going to eliminate GMOs even before they do, as happened in Europe, as happened with Yoplait and Dannon. First Yoplait, 2 weeks later Dannon. It had to. We think 5% of US shoppers avoiding GM brands would demonstrate a drop in market share sufficient to create a tipping point. Now, how do you get people to want to avoid eating GMOs? We saw it tonight. It took 45 minutes to an hour, and many of you made this a turning point in your digestive life. Ready to kick out brands that you've been eating for your whole lives, just by learning the truth. So we know exactly what we need to do. We know exactly what we need to say in terms of increasing the desire to eliminate GMOs. Then we need to show you how to do it. By the way, this is why to avoid GMOs, and this is how. Non-GMO shopping guide. Because 53% of Americans say they want to avoid GMOs if they're labeled. 53%. We only need 5%. If 9 out of 10 of those 53% are lying, we still have enough to create a tipping point. And we have a portable labeling guide. We also have non-GMO, Shop No GMO, the iPhone application, and non-GMOshoppingguide.com. So we've seen a tipping point in bovine growth hormone, and we're seeing the beginnings of a tipping point against GMOs. There's now 400 groups now proposing, working this petition to the FDA and to Obama about labeling. All of a sudden, this is on fire. And you know why? People are learning about the dangers. And it's starting the popcorn effect. So fortunately, my friend Les has organized GMO Free Seattle, which is now changing its name to GMO Free Washington, and has a group ready to receive you. Les has been working his butt off till 1 in the morning, creating events and infrastructure and sponsorship and allies, and let's hear it for Les. So this is what we call a local non-GMO action group. And the group can create events and specific targets. And we have national groups also, where everyone all over the country who's focusing on the same target can work together, so they don't have to reinvent the wheel. So there's a national group for parent outreach, for campus outreach, for non-English speaking outreach, for doctors groups, for patient advocacy groups, for religious groups that think GMO means God move over, for all these, for restaurants, for CSAs, for farmers markets, so that we can create specific information that works for that particular group. And so we have actually made very good inroads into doctors groups and very good inroads into parents groups. And education is the key. And the way we're doing it is, I mean, I didn't think, oh, I'm an author, what should I write about? What's interesting? The reason I wrote Seeds of Deception was as a strategy, and if you ever want to use it for a handout, that's for the right brain readers. So if you get that as a lending library, that's who you're targeted for that, and that's what you say. Then for the left brainers, you give them the genetic roulette. Then the people that like to watch movies, we have some movies. We have here, Hidden Dangers in Kids' Meals. Can you guess what strategy that was for? That's for parents. It's 28.5 minutes to put on local access television. World According to Monsanto makes you want to break something. And it's absolutely devastating, but I made sure that people didn't feel hopeless at the end because I've been in bonus material. I didn't create this, someone else did. 3-minute video called What We Can Do. It talks about the tipping point. And an 18-minute video called Your Milk on Drugs, Just Say No. And an audio CD that you can make as many copies of as you want and pass them around. This Scientist Under Attack knew about Ignacio Chapela, the guy that was threatened by the senior Mexican government official, about Arpad Pusztai. So you get to meet Arpad Pusztai and see what his life was like after the event. He's a brilliant man. Just came out this month. So we have the shopping guides and the health risk brochures. We create material to package the information and impact that you saw tonight. So you don't have to learn how to be a speaker on GMOs. You can just pass the link, the book, the audio, the video, the article, the blog, whatever. For those that want to be speakers, we have speaker training. A 4-part webinar. You can contact our office and purchase access to it. We give scholarships or partial scholarships for those that can't afford. And we've trained 700 people. I gave a 1-day, all-day workshop in Seattle after Greenfest this year. How many people, anyone here on that? Great. So how am I doing? Yeah, the people that I teach, they're the ones that rate me. So we have speaker training. We have a Tipping Point Network forum so that if you join a group, you can be talking to others locally and nationally. We have about 2,000 people in groups around the country. And we're focused on consumers. Because when you do a strategic analysis of what are the strengths and weaknesses of the biotech industry, well, one of their strengths is government. One of our weaknesses is cash, which means government. You can't touch the government without a lot of cash. But one of our strengths, consumers, and the concerns about health. So I rarely talk about the environmental impacts of GMOs, even though they may be worse. Even though the genes released today may outlast the effects of global warming and nuclear waste, the self-propagating pollution of the gene pool, we have no technology to fully clean it up. You are cordially required, no, cordially invited to participate in what is probably, if not the most, one of the most important needs of our time. Think about what GMOs are. exposing the products of infant science to everyone who eats and to all future generations. And not just humans, but living things. There's nothing like it in history. And you saw how it was thrown onto the market for profit and politics at the expense of life. But you also witnessed the hands go up and the difference between the before and the after. You realized how easy it is to change someone's diet on the spot. And then if you calculate how many we need to eliminate GMOs, if 5% is approximately the number, 15 million Americans, that's just 5.6 million households. There's 28 million Americans that buy organic on a regular basis, 87 million that think that GMOs are quite unsafe, 159 million that wouldn't eat GMOs if they were labeled, and 90% of Americans that want GMOs labeled. We actually are the majority. We just need to use our power, even a few of us. So I am so excited to be with you tonight and to see the hands raised. Because sometimes I do that and I have to then face the question of how can we organize a group to take that energy and move it somewhere. And so I create what's called an activist circle. We teach people to do this so that we create a group and the time to meet and all that stuff. It's all done. So it's so easy now for you to fit right in, and if you don't want to be part of one in Seattle, create one here or anywhere you're from. And you know, people want this information. And you don't have to convince anyone who's resistant to create the tipping point. We have far more people on our side than we need. So I want you to join me to put on your cosmic resume, help end the genetic engineering of the food supply in 2011 and 12. Thank you very much.
I'm Les Barrett. I'm a physician up in Seattle, and we've gotten together the last 5 months, and we're growing quite rapidly. We've got a lot of people who come all the way up to Everett who are working with us. Our group is growing so fast that we're changing our name as of tomorrow from GMO Seattle to GMO Washington. How many in here would really like to have GMOs eliminated by next year if the California initiative gets passed? How many people are willing to put some of that time that you don't have, that I don't have, into helping us?
How do you find people who are active in the areas? What you do is you join the Tipping Point Network at responsibletechnology.org. You're going to get a password and a URL to a forum. The forum is going to have every state of the union. You go into Washington, you look inside Washington and see if there's a local area near you. If there's not, you can create one, and then you can be the kind of the point person. You can also connect. The GMO Free Washington is going to end up being like kind of a central organizing thing for the Washington Tipping Point Network groups as well. But both will work, and I would say never wait for us to organize. Start. Okay. Is there a way to detox from GMOs? When rats were fed soy over 8 months, those that were fed the GM soy had changes in their testicles, pancreas, and livers. And when some of them went on a non-GM soy diet for a month, a lot of that reversed. When the mice that were on the non-GM soy for 8 months had no problem. When they went on GM soy for a month, they started to get those problems. So some reversibility is built into the system. We don't even know about the gut bacteria because no one's tested it over here. I've put it out to so many people that I want that, and I know someone that started to gather the statistics, but I haven't seen it. I wanted to get it into a peer-reviewed study, but I don't know. It's basically comparing the EU versus the US health statistics since GMOs are introduced. No one's done it. Yes. How do you know if you're buying a GMO? If you buy organic, it's not allowed to intentionally use GMOs, although some contamination can occur. If you buy products that are non-GMO, they generally take steps to avoid GMOs, and the best label is called non-GMO Project Verified, which requires testing. Again, there might be a small amount, but if it is, it's very tiny. You can buy products in the shopping guide. Everything in the shopping guide has at least been enrolled in the non-GMO project. And you can buy products that avoid the at-risk ingredients. So you can read the at-risk ingredients on the inside back cover of the shopping guide. So it's maltodextrin, dextrose, corn syrup, soy lecithin, things like that. that are typically derived from GM crops. A very famous biologist told me that when cotton is clean, then the Bt won't be there because the Bt is not produced in the cellulose. Now, I want to see the data, what I believe in, but I want to see the data. People were getting allergic reactions from touching the cotton that was not clean. People were getting allergic reactions from cleaning the cotton. We haven't heard of any allergic reactions from people wearing cotton. We take cottonseed oil. That's the only thing we eat. Well, in Vermont, a co-op set up a table out front and asked for donations of $10. And said for every $10 we'll give a Seeds of Deception to our legislators. And the Vermont legislature was reviewing a bill on GMOs, the first state regulation, and someone did a thesis on the effects of the book on the passage of the first state regulation and interviewed the legislators. And I read the quotes, and it was amazing. One said, the book spread like wildfire. It was the basis of every conversation on GMOs once it arrived. He said, you know, I read the book and I realized I've changed my vote. It radicalized me. I changed my vote. And then other people would say, you know, I don't normally read books during the session, but I couldn't put it down. You know, I said, oh yes, God. And and it completely changed my vote. And when I showed up at the Agriculture Committee meeting, after they had passed and all that, they gave me hero's welcome. And someone came out, one of the legislators came out and spoke to a group of 250 people. We're in the cold winter time, and they were protesting for trying to get the vote. And she said, everyone should read this book. So yeah, when people do read it, it's very significant. Now, the genetic roulette has been used all over the world now as like the source book. The biotech industry actually released a whole website attacking it, so you know it was hurting them, because they must have spent a fortune for these guys to make up all the science. And when I started going through the science, it was such pathetic science. It was basically, you know, it was as if they had not read what they were critiquing, or they were self-contradictory, or they were just coming up with the same dumb arguments that we'd already disproved. It was just terrible. On July 1st, the USDA wrote a letter to Scott's Miracle-Gro saying, we do not have to review your Roundup-Ready Kentucky bluegrass. You see, when GMOs were originally evaluated, it was based on what was called a regulatory framework. The White House did not want Congress to pass any new laws, so they jerry-rigged existing laws to make them applicable to GMOs. They did a terrible job. It was completely the laws were unprepared to handle the task. The only reason the USDA deals with GMOs is because it's under the Pest Act, you know, protecting against pests, and then later it was invasive species. So under those two acts, they have jurisdiction. And the way they justify it with GMOs is that the promoter, which turns the gene on, comes from a virus. And the gene is usually from bacteria. So if it's from a virus and a bacteria, those are both pests. And so on that basis, they have to review. And the review is ridiculous, but it happens anyway. The Scott's Miracle-Gro Kentucky bluegrass does not use a viral promoter and does not use bacteria gene. And so the USDA said, okay, we're off the hook. You can just put it on the market without telling the government. No one in the government has to know. The USDA doesn't have to know, the EPA doesn't have to know, the FDA doesn't have to know, you just put it on. So I wrote a letter to the USDA saying, let me get this straight. If there was tobacco that was produced by the tobacco companies, smuggled into Brazil, engineered to produce higher levels of nicotine, smuggled back in the US, put into packets to addict people more. This is true. If that didn't have a pest promoter, were you saying it's not the jurisdiction, that the government doesn't have to look at that? And what about if you have lawn care that produces an aroma that makes people hungry, or attractive to the lawn, or repelled to the lawn, like, hey, your kids get away from there. No, it's the lawn that keeps the kids away. Or what about if it attracts the animals, or keeps the animals away, or makes people want to buy your product? And you know, their response was, we don't want to comment on any hypothetical situation. In other words, oh my God, we never thought of these things. So basically, they're opening the door for thousands of products now to be introduced without any government notification. So they can be introduced without anything. So that's the bad news. But what it does is it tells us we got to move. We got to get our tipping point together. See, right now the entire government is basically a pro-GMO juggernaut. You read WikiLeaks and they're using the entire State Department apparatus to promote GMOs. The U.S. Chief Negotiator for Agriculture is a GMO guy. The head of the USDA was the Biotech Governor of the Year. The Food Safety Czar is Michael Taylor. The USAID lead guy is a Monsanto kind of guy. So all these people are just using the U.S. government apparatus to try and get these things out. And the Center for Food Safety, God bless them, they're doing the lawsuits and they're trying to slow things down and stop things. But that's containment. What we focus on at the Institute for Responsible Technology primarily is elimination. It's a different strategy. If we can eliminate it, nothing else gets added. So when I see all these things being added, you know, all these different, the threats of the apples, the threats of the cauliflower, the threats of the eggplant, it makes me feel like we've got to go faster to get the tipping point, because then everything implodes. And the US probably will no longer be a bully to the other countries if the industry shrinks here. And the whole investment climate for the non-food crop will change. So everything changes on the other side of the tipping point. So the good news is, I've been working on this since 1996. I have never seen what I'm seeing now. I cannot keep up with it. There are so many things going on right now. It is popcorn. And people are just, it's in the air. Larry woke up on January 20th with an epiphany saying we got to have a ballot initiative in California. She came out on March 10th as one person. Now there are 90 teams in California to make it happen. And you know, what's happening with Les and his team is emblematic of what is happening as like the Earth's immune system rising up saying we have to protect our planet and our bodies and our offspring. So this is really a fantastic time. And being a fantastic time, it means that our actions are leveraged. If no one heard of GMOs like back in the days, 10 years ago, you're trying to get the information out, it's slow motion. It takes a while. Now it's like, oh yeah, I've been hearing about that, tell me about it. Oh yeah, I've been trying to, oh I can avoid it, oh here's the shopping guide. All your actions are magnified and multiplied. You don't have to think about doing this for a lifetime. I think it'll happen with it by the end of next year. Now is the time to create the big turning and the big protection, and to listen to our great-great-great-great-grandchildren knocking on our door saying, so what did you do when you found out? You say, I was right there. Thank you all.